Hello and welcome to the Peter Mackay Motorsport podcast. Today is a very special episode because I have two people on all the way over the pond in the United States from my very favourite podcast, Dinner with Racers. I have Honda factory driver Ryan Eversley and media baron Sean Heckman. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Now,
or not.
For those that don't know, and I'm sure there's very few, tell us about Dinner with Racers and how you came up with the concept.
Well, it kind of started as an idea that a group of us had. So Sean used to work for a race team called TRG, and at the time we had Andy Lally, who's a close friend of ours and champion road racer over here in the States, and another guy named Spencer Rumpelli, who's also a big-time race car driver over here, as well as a team manager named Shannon Davis. And we would try to get together on race weekends because at one point Shannon, Andy, and Spence and I were all roommates, and then Sean was the PR media guy for that program, and his sense of humor was apparently in line with my sense of humor according to all these people. So I hadn't really met him at that point, but we'd all go to dinner at these racetracks, and we would just sit around and tell lies and stories and just BSing the whole time. And the joke we always had was, what if we could like capture this and put it out there? And then we considered the idea of like setting up cameras, but then Sean very smartly was like, do you know what that would cost and how would we do it, where would it live? And so it was one of these things that we talked about quite a bit, and we try to have these dinners on race weekends just to like have a little sense of home even when you're on the road.
Yes.
And it was just fun. And eventually as the conversation kept going, it kind of whittled itself down to just me and Sean and I that kept going, we do need to do something like that. And then I'll let Sean take it from there. But that was kind of how it initiated, was friends outside of racing getting together on a race weekend just to have dinner and just make fun of each other and tell lies.
And Sean, so you're the man that makes it sound good as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm absolutely the brains behind the operation. Without me, there would be no podcast. Between my Twitter following, my persona with the public, my real skill to be likable, this show would not exist.
Is it true that you didn't necessarily have social media before Dinner with Racers, or was it Instagram? I can't quite remember.
You're actually correct. I had a Facebook because I am a boomer that was born in 1979. And literally on the road of our first season doing the podcast, I started a Twitter account in, I guess that would have been 2015. It was a little late. Now, having said that, I was doing social media for clients. So I was doing social media for some of the sports car teams and IndyCar programs and things like that I've been working on. But I never felt the need to have social media for myself. But then as the podcast started going, I was like, yeah, I probably should, create an extension of these dumb jokes that we're doing so that I can never get away from it. And then, so between Twitter and then not too much longer after that, I started an Instagram account. And I think right now I am up to almost as many as 3,000 followers.
Wow, good job, man.
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
There are pro race car drivers who have less than that.
That is absolutely fair. And that is because I am better than them.
So to kind of answer the rest of the question,
right.
with the way the podcast really came to be, because I didn't even know what a podcast was, and I have to admit I never listened to one before we did ours, so I really wasn't sure what the whole background was on them and how they really worked. And Sean listened to quite a bit, and so we both had an existing relationship with the Continental Tire folks. I was racing in the series, and Sean was doing a lot of media for teams in that series, and so he was around the PR folks from Continental. And so we put together a proposal, went to them and asked for some sponsorship to do this road trip idea, and they were like super cool right off the bat. We're like, yeah. And then we both went, shit, we should ask for a lot more money, because they said yes. They said yes right away. It's like, oh.
Yeah, the yes was like, can you guys, what do you think? And they're like, yeah, let's do it within a heartbeat. Like,
yeah.
Oh,
do you want to open the proposal?
Yeah. So it's like, great, now we have to do it, and we could have asked for 3 times as much.
Right. And so we started out, and I tell people this all the time, that Sean, because of his background in Hollywood and doing production for real TV shows and movie channels and things like that, because I'm just in my head going, this is going to be great. We've got really supportive fans. My racing fans are super supportive. This is going to just be like, everyone's going to love it. And he pulled me aside like on day one and was like, you have to remember something, that movies with great actors and great production sometimes totally tank and totally flop. So you have to be okay knowing that we might only have 100 listeners or we might have 1 million listeners. And as long as you're like okay with the work we do and you really believe in what we're doing, then it really doesn't matter if people like it or not. But just be prepared that it could fail. And I was like, oh, I didn't even consider that an option. And so that kind of put me back on my heels. I was like, all right, so really this isn't a fun road trip. Like, we do need to do justice for our sponsors, but also for the stories we want to hear and tell others. So if he hadn't said that, I might have been a little bit more like, whatever. But it kind of gave me a little bit of an eye-opener, like, oh, right, that's true. Real TV shows that you love and movies that you love sometimes just don't get the audience they deserve.
What would you say is the movie? I know you guys are big movie buffs and stuff, or what would we rephrase that? What's the racing movie or show that has not got the credit it deserved?
Ooh.
You can't say Dinner with Racers.
Yeah, the racing movie specific to racing that has not received the credit that it deserves. Because like the obvious ones have been done to death already.
Yeah.
Right? We sell a shirt based on one. I can't speak for Ryan, but I'm going Fast and Furious 3 Tokyo Drift.
Oh no.
Oh.
Because it is it's very true to life. So before, I don't know if you do this, but before the podcast, I was a member of the Yakuza.
Okay.
And when I lived in Japan, so I was in the Yakuza for a few years, and we used to drive cars, and we would do what's called suizo, which is Japanese for sideways. And when I was in car chases, because I was in the Yakuza, the easiest way to get away from somebody would be to keep sliding the car left and right when you're going in a straight line. There were some who would say, if you just straightened up the wheel and made a straight line, you can catch the guy you're trying to catch easier. But I was like, nah, this suizo thing is the way to go. Also, even the biggest, baddest grandpas that run an entire mafia all drive cars that apparently rev at 20,000 RPM.
And have 24-speed transmissions.
Yes,
correct.
Ryan, what about you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take over. So one of my favorite movies is Stroker Ace, where Burt Reynolds is a NASCAR driver and he's lost his ride. He's got to get a new job, and it's just like the '80s Burt Reynolds special. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those movies that you watch and it's like there's no point. It's fun and games. Every scene had to be hilarious to make, and it's really popular in the stock car racing world because it's kind of like this old throwback. But I don't know that anybody really likes it, knows about it necessarily outside of the NASCAR crowd. And you don't have to be a racing fan, stock car racing fan to really appreciate it, because it's just like that typical funny 80s, like, just, cameos, and Tim Richmond's in it for a second, so obviously that makes it good. And I just think that's a classic.
And what was it called again? Remind me.
Stroker Ace, which is his name as a NASCAR driver in the movie.
I am writing it down right now. You know what I'm doing tomorrow? That's going straight on.
It's based on a book.
It's Stroker. Okay.
Yeah, there's a book as well, and it's Stroker Ace. If I'm not mistaken on the lore of it, was basically a book that came out, and Stroker Ace became sort of the pseudonym for a lot of driver stories that went into one fake character.
Right.
So allegedly, the story of Stroker Ace is actually like 20 different guys in NASCAR, who all kind of compiled their stories into this one fictitious character.
That sounds right up my street. That's for sure. So, and I'd never heard of it before. And normally, I'm a truffle dog for race movies. So that's a good one.
Yeah. What's your answer, Peter?
Oh, good question. I have to say, and this is a horribly unpopular opinion, Le Mans doesn't do much for me. It's pretty it's pretty hard going. Although the story of how they made it is really cool. I've heard Derek Bell tell the story about Steve McQueen lying on his front and nearly running him over. I mean, that's just probably just shows how cool Derek Bell is, I suppose. But good question. Do you know what I thought was really, really good, and it came out very recently, was the Porsche Endurance documentary? I don't know if you guys have seen it.
I'm an Acura Honda driver, so I definitely didn't. Yeah.
You're not allowed to watch it.
Yeah, no, I get fined if I watched it.
Okay, so or you could say I watched it and it was terrible.
Yeah, no, I like some of the Porsche guys, but we're big fans of anybody that employs our friends.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say it's probably a great movie. If Alvin Springer's in it, then it's the best movie ever.
Well, I was surprised there was no Pat Long in it, and I thought that he would have been in it a bit more, but he wasn't in it. He was probably off being an influencer.
Right.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, and I don't know your video production background, but tripods can be a little bit sensitive. They're very hard to get, and there's a certain height limit to tripods.
Yeah, they're pretty tall.
So they may not have been able to get a tripod low enough for Patrick to do a sit down.
Yeah.
Oh dear me!
If there was a scene with Jörg Bergmeister and he was off set, Patrick was probably there. You just couldn't see him.
Probably, but see, he was meant to be in it. They just couldn't make it work.
Exactly.
I see. So you've had, we've already mentioned a few guys who've been on the show. I mean, when you did the first series, was it sort of sheet of paper saying, okay, who are we going to get on? Because I guess a lot of the people who were in the first series, like Katherine Legge and Andy Lally and Patrick Long, etc., they're all quite close friends of yours, aren't they?
Yeah, that's typical for a first season. I think we stuck to. Ryan and I wanted to have a loose format, and a loose format would only work with people that trusted us.
Sure.
And so people that we were comfortable having a conversation with. There are also a few folks that, being the first season with Continental, and trying to sort of understand what that dynamic was going to be, there were a few guests that we had that were ideas maybe Continental wanted to push to see if some of their other sponsored athletes might be of interest. And I would say, and I'll let Ryan take from there, but it was a combination of friends, but also crossover audiences and things that we were trying to experiment with to see what worked and what didn't.
Sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And knowing like our first guest being Andy Lally, who's literally been like a brother to me, and Sean and Andy have worked together for years and years and years, we knew we were going to get all the good stories out, and it kind of set us up for our rhythm too. Because like Sean and I, he's in California, I'm in Atlanta, so then we come together for a trip and we go do this, and generally it takes a day or two for us to kind of get synced up. Mm-hmm. And really know each other's rhythm, which is important for the show. But also the thing that you have to consider is that we're doing it on a road trip. So if we can get 5 or 6 guests within an hour of each other, like in Atlanta, Bob Barsha, Andy Lally, Pompelli, Pompelli's dad was in town, all those guests together, that saves us a ton of travel, which is tiring and hard to do. And so anytime we can get a big group of people within a couple hours drive of each other, it's like a home run. So Atlanta was big for that. LA can be good for that. Charlotte, North Carolina is good for that. Indianapolis. And so if you notice, our trips kind of hit the same town, so we can get those groups of people that are around.
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, you've had an incredible alumni of guests now. I mean, who's the guest that you still want to have on the show, and why?
My personal guest that I want really, really badly is John Force from drag racing, because he's a bigger than life character.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure he's just a crazy person that got away with being a racer, and I love that about him. And so he's really high up on my list. And
I hate to sound political and not funny, or vague and not funny, but the truth is I don't have like a dream list. And the reason why I say that is there's a few people that I would love to have for kind of my own reasons, but like obviously we would love to get AJ Foyt or Roger Penske or folks like that. But the truth is, I don't think Ryan and I are necessarily I don't think we're necessarily upset that things like that aren't happening, because we're more proud of good episodes than we are high profile guests.
Yes.
And so if we're going to get a sit down with somebody and we're just going to hear the same stories that have already been told, that honestly doesn't really interest either one of us. And so because of that, I've never gotten too big on a dream list, because, if let's say we get a super high, like Roger Penske, not to just to throw out a random name, it's like, okay, you're going to get Roger Penske, but you're going to get him for 30 minutes.
Right.
I don't know that we can make something to the standard that we've been trying to keep. And so I don't know that I get too excited. The one person, I'll put this on the spot, and I think, Ryan, you would agree, Kelly Collins, who's probably not a household name.
Yeah.
Kelly Collins is one of my favorite human beings in the world because he's truly like stand-up comedy levels of funny, but immensely inappropriate and refuses to go on our show because he knows exactly what'll happen and he knows that he won't be able to control himself.
Right.
So he knows that he's going to get the show cancelled if he goes on. He doesn't want to do that to you.
Well, luckily, I can edit, so I'm not worried about it getting canceled, but he doesn't know that.
Yeah, and he's going to get canceled.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the episode when you had David Kimmer from iRacing on. That the way that it seemed like that was quite a cool moment for you, Sean, particularly.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, Ryan and I both are fans of some of the titles that David Kimmer has programmed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up as somebody who has generally tried to do a certain amount of sim racing throughout his whole life, I found David particularly cool. But did you know that so I looked it up on the iRacing forums. A lot of the iRacers did not like that episode at all.
No way,
and
really?
It's one of my favorite hate. But it's awesome because the hate. It all comes down to like they didn't ask the questions I would have asked, but they were like so gamer specific that like it was like, well, right, but I don't need to know about which if he did this on Unity versus some other form of coding. Like I just wanted to know about growing up in Rhodesia, which is far more interesting.
Right.
But David Kimmer, I don't know if you do any iRacing, Peter, but
I do. Yeah.
David Kimmer is just such a unique story. So all right, how are you at the iRacing?
I am. Yes. The problem is, I'm kind of getting to the point now where it's actually mattering to me, and it's just become a little bit too real now. Where you're actually getting angry if you get caught in a wreck or something like that. But no, I do quite a lot. Like my mission that I'm on right now is to become a live motor racing commentator, and actually iRacing's provided an incredible opportunity for me to get experience and learn how a broadcast works and just honing that kind of commentary craft, especially right now when everything in inverted commas the real world is on hold. So yeah, no, I do. The program's actually it's an amazing piece of technology and what you can do with it. And I think for a fan engagement perspective, the fact that I was in a race with Jeroen Bleekemolen the other day, Le Mans winner, you think this is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the part that I think is awesome.
Yeah, and when we kind of put together our iRacing league, it was important to us that we would have fans and journalists and racers all competing against each other because, not for nothing, but sports car racing doesn't have the legends that some of these other sports do, like NASCAR and IndyCar.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, oh, we're going to have all these pro racers from, let's say, IMSA go do this event, it's like, well, yeah, like some of them are big names, but a lot of them aren't. And I don't know that fans are going to be like, oh my God, I get to watch, versus like, oh, I get to race against Bleekemolen, like you just said. Like to us, that meant more. And that's why we do the way we're doing it, because we want fans to come away with those experiences. And I get text messages from people like the day after the night of one of our races. We're like, I got to go side by side with Joey Hand. That was like so cool. And right there, you're like, win. That's a win.
Yeah. That is...
even down to the point where I'm sorry.
No, go on.
I mean, even down to the point where, so we did a multi-class race at Long Beach, where we had 7 different open wheel classes in our racing league, and I think we had in that particular race, we invited like 5 or 6 pros from different levels of prototype racing and IndyCar racing and things like that. Somebody who ran that event was commenting to me that they got a sense of how they are with traffic because they're all different. Like apparently Dane Cameron does not give a shit about passing people in traffic, and he'll just stuff you, whereas Ricky Taylor was very, very polite and took his time and waited to get around corners and whatnot.
That does not surprise me. He's the nicest guy.
That glimpse into personalities. I'm sorry, say it again?
I was saying that does not surprise me about Ricky. When I met him, he just seemed like the nicest guy.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. But my point is, like, they not only do they get to race with them, but they truly get a sense of, like, what it's like to be on track with these folks. And that's just something you can't put a price on.
No, absolutely.
Because we're not rich.
Well, I think it's interesting the point you make, Ryan, about IMSA and about the drivers and how, like you say, they're maybe not like a huge star like a Scott Dixon or a Kyle Busch or whatever. But I think a big part of what you guys have done is, certainly for me, we don't get an enormous coverage of IMSA here. I can get it through, YouTube and things like that. But it's I think it's, for me, the format that you guys have with Dinner with Racers has been so good because you get a really good impression of not only their career achievements, but actually their personalities as well? Is that something that you kind of actively try to send that message across that people might not normally see?
Yeah, that's exactly. Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
I'm saying.
Oh, I heard something. Anyways, okay, yeah, exactly right. The whole thing for us is we know a lot of these people from behind the scenes, and we know that they can be funny or really engaging or have this tremendous personality that nobody really gets to see, and it might not even be their fault because Sean and I agree that the messaging needs to be handled probably a little differently for road racing, to showcase these things. And I think cars are as cool as anybody, but like I think back as a kid, and drivers that I looked up to were the ones I got to interact with, that I get to see at the racetrack, and they'd actually talk to you. And so as cool as the car was they were racing, I'm still cheering for that person too. And if you look at stock car racing and IndyCar racing, a lot of those drivers that have personalities, well, they're the ones that people go to see. And so if we can showcase like a Mark Miller, who might not be a household name, but we know he's funny as anybody, or like Steve Goff, who is a amazing talented mechanic that worked with McLaren in the heyday and now works at HPD. Well, I know he's a really clever, crafty guy that's fun to talk to, but you've probably never heard of him before. And when those episodes get loved and people say that they liked them, to us, that's like winning, to hear that, man, I really enjoyed that. Like you saying that you enjoyed the David Kemmer episode, to us is like, yeah, because who thought to get him? Because we did that a year ago when iRacing wasn't the mainstay for motorsports on the planet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also on that point, it was just down the road was the Will Turner episode. I remember crying, laughing the story about him. Was it one of his friends? He'd hacked his phone and put lots of inappropriate images that his wife then discovered on his phone.
Sean,
I don't know what you're talking about. But overall, these are the kind of things that we want to have out there.
Yeah.
Because back to Ryan's whole point with Stroke a Race. Stroke a Race is nothing but a compilation of weird pranks and antics and whatnot, and that still is true today. It's just maybe not as discussed. So something like Will Turner putting a bunch of adult photos on RJ Valentine's phone is a perfect example of like how this stuff still goes on, and we need to be celebrating that as opposed to being offended by it.
I totally agree. I mean, I'll give you a similar story. I sat at a dinner. It was quite a posh dinner down in London, and I sat next to the guy that runs McLaren at the corporate level, and I about had a heart attack. And but he said, "Oh, you work in the whiskey business?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he goes, "Well, do you know what me, Zach Brown, and Andreas Seidel do?" And I was like, "No, go on." And he says, "Well, on a Monday night, we always have a conference call with the Bahrain investors in McLaren, and it's usually a pretty difficult phone call." He says, "So what we do is we have a scotch about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Monday for an hour or so, and we just leave our weapons at the door, and we just share a scotch, and it just mellows everything out." And I was like, McLaren's meant to be the most square place in the world, and this is
right.
You wouldn't believe that, would you?
Right.
That's so
awesome.
Yeah.
I like that story.
Yeah. Now we'll go while we're on the subject of guests. You've had a couple of, let's say, controversial people on the show. You've had, in sports car racing in particular, has attracted some controversial people. Of course, for the listeners that don't know, sports car racing it's really unique and I find it really special because if you can't, go to the Super Bowl and throw the touchdown pass or hit a home run in the World Series or whatever, but you can go to Le Mans. If you've got the money and the license, you can go to Le Mans and race. And of course that attracts very wealthy people. You've had Michael Avenatti, lawyer to Stormy Daniels, who took on Donald Trump, and Scott Tucker, who was involved in scandal, and you interviewed both of them while they were in the middle of legal proceeding, which eventually saw them in jail. How did you guys approach those interviews? What was it like? What was it like from your perspective?
In terms of getting the interview, or in terms of once we were conducting it
Well,
itself?
both actually. How you prepare for that, and how you, because I know both of them appeared to be, they both revealed more than I would probably expect them to, given the circumstances at the time. What was your kind of just your general account of the whole experience?
A lot of, how did this happen? I'll I'll let Ryan describe the approach, but in terms of the getting them, the trick to getting folks like that to come on is to ask.
Yes. Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Like it's the funniest thing because it's I don't want to speak for Ryan, but a lot of like when we got both of those interviews, it was probably the most common thing we would get from within the paddock. Like, how did you get that? How did he come on? Right. And I think in both of our cases, it was like, well, we just asked, and it didn't like it really wasn't a whole lot of back and forth because they were both actually excited to come on and let their story be heard. But I think part of that is the approach that we take, and I'll let Ryan take that part.
Yeah, and to kind of give a little background on both of them, with Scott Tucker, for example, we had done the Level 5 episode and the Jeff Brown episode in Season 1.
Yeah. And
it was super popular, and really, but I think there's a reason we had the success we had because it put us on the map. And he heard it, and Scott Tucker, being Scott Tucker, was like, well, I want to tell my side. And we were like, okay, well, we want to do that too, but we also need to ask because we're going to get roasted if we don't mention anything. And he was like, okay. And when we asked him about it, he said, well, I figured you'd let me tell my side. Now, the key part of what he just said is why we're able to get these things, but it's also who we are in general. Mm-hmm. Like, I might not agree with Scott Tucker's business practices,
sure,
or I might totally agree, but I am not a business professional.
Yes.
I don't know anything about the things he does for a living, so I can't really put him on the spot because I'd be doing it an injustice because I'm not a real journalist. Mm-hmm. I'm a race car driver that has a side gig that has become pretty successful, and Sean's not a financial industry insider, so we'll ask questions, but it's really not our episode. So if he wants to say that up is down and down is up, it's okay if you say so.
Yeah.
Now if he decided to say something about racing that I'm absolutely an expert on, or media stuff like Sean is absolutely an expert on as well as racing, then we'll happily, go back and forth on stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important because if I say, well, I don't agree with you on that at all, well, now it's about me, and that's not what the episode's about. It's his side of his story. And a perfect example of this, and it's not something I go to bed thinking about at night, but like Tony Stewart is very big on hunting.
Yes,
he has like a hunting thing. And I don't like that. I don't think it's something that's great. And it's just because, for obvious reasons.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if I sat there and I was like, well, hang on a second, I don't like that. Well, tough shit. It's not my episode. It's Tony Stewart's episode.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing that he does, and he wants to talk about it. So, okay. Now, if he said to me, like, well, what do you think of that? I'd be like, well, I don't agree.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But if I sit there and start putting my agenda onto them, well, now the episode's turned into something else. And I think we've been good about doing that with everybody. Like, we've interviewed drivers that I've had a issue with on track before,
mm-hmm.
that I'm like, and we've had guests say things on the air that we're like, ooh, don't like that at all. But we just have to kind of eat it and let them tell their story, because in the end, that's what this is about.
Yeah, I think I think I could imagine some of the examples of that where I think it's you just got, I guess you just got to trust what the listener will be able to. I think you're absolutely right. You do give them that fair opportunity. On the Michael Avenatti episode, of course, he actually raced at Daytona with a guy I know, Rory Butcher, who used to race GT and is now in British touring cars, and he raced with Michael in 2015 at Daytona. It was the one time he went over there. But he he was one of the most recent episodes, and of course I felt that you guys got whilst showing him without basically antagonizing him, you got were you surprised how much he revealed in that interview, would you say?
Yeah, I'll go first. The thing about Avenatti that we both found interesting, and I don't think he would disagree if he heard this interview. When we interviewed Scott Tucker, the sense of like his understanding based on his body language was that he was not going to go to jail like
right.
12 days later.
Sure.
And when we interviewed Avenatti, you could tell that Mike had an absolute sense of like, he felt like he had probably done some things wrong and that he could have done some things differently. And when we started talking about family with him, you could really see it on his face that he was like having some hard thoughts.
Okay.
And what we can't do is put a camera on stuff like that, because the first thing that we notice, especially when we're doing our real TV stuff now, and we've thought about this since the get-go. Sean was very smart to say, if we film this, people are going to change. Once there's a camera involved, people button up pretty quickly. But when you're comfortable and you have the headset on, it's an intimate meal, things get shared that might not necessarily get shared if there's a camera on. And I think because it was a podcast with Avenatti, his exact, like, you could see, I don't want to say guilt necessarily, but definitely having a sense of, like, you know, remorse for some of the things that maybe he did or the way he felt about it. And that was something that was like, wow, that's interesting to see. And obviously, you know, because I think, Sean, you asked him how many counts he had pending, or knew the number, or thought we knew the number, and then he said, oh, no, it's more than that. And it was like, oh, okay.
Correct.
That was a very good pause for effect there. Very good.
Yeah. What he said.
We'll change the path. Tell us about, you mentioned the TV show. Tell us about the Amazon Prime show. What was that like for you guys? It going from a podcast to all of a sudden you're on one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world. How did that all come about?
Well, I mean, it came about in very, very fortunate ways. It's just, you know, Ryan and I are always looking to expand on what we're doing and trying to find ways to continue to grow. And the other part of it is that we're both fairly competitive people, and I think competitive people typically get bored pretty easily.
Sure, yeah.
And so with the podcast, you know, we knew that we wanted to do more in the video realm, and obviously coming from a video background, plus Ryan's enjoyment of that kind of stuff and thinking about his own career, we knew that video would be another step. We'd kind of dabbled in that the previous year with a video that we self-produced about Alan Kulwicki, who was a NASCAR driver who met an untimely end, but was, you know, very successful in a short amount of time on his own conditions. So we'd already kind of proven what we were capable of with virtually no money. And honestly, just the stars kind of aligned between Continental's willingness to support us in growing the platform and finding an avenue with Amazon Prime to make it all work. And so we did this in 2019. We did a 6-part documentary series where we did 6 episodes. All of them are about 30 minutes to an hour, and they're all extremely different from one another. And then that's going to continue on into 2020, and we'll just see where it goes from there. But the challenge, I don't know how to. Ryan, you might actually be better to speak about the challenge, because I feel like I knew what to expect knowing the video side. Ryan, what was it like for you? Because obviously you've shown up on camera for plenty of TV productions in the past, but this was the first time that you were actually the guy, you know, helping make it happen.
It's a great question, Sean. I'm glad you asked it, which is me pausing to think about how to answer it. I would say it was. I'm proud of things in my career that I've done in racing and charity and stuff like that. But the TV show is one of the things I'm really, really proud of, because it's seriously 99% of what you see is Sean and I doing it with the help of, like, Sean's partner Jason from time to time. We brought in some people to help us for, like, certain shoots, but we're talking like for like one day, that was it, that we might have an extra camera person or a proper sound person. But, like, we went to Jamaica, just the two of us, in a van full of equipment. And, you know, it's a lot of work. And it's more, I think when you see how we did it behind the scenes, if you saw how we did it behind the scenes, it's a lot more work than you give it credit for. Sure. And I started as a mechanic, so I know a hard, long day's work of, like, monotonous stuff, tearing up, pulling down. And the way Sean likes to produce stuff is, if you don't ever want to tell him there might be something that we can get, because we're going to go get it. You know what I mean? And then my attitude has to be, as much as I don't want to climb over that brush hill and go walk through the jungle in Jamaica with the camera and the light and all this stuff, if that's the shot that gets us the next cool thing, then we have to do it. And so our stubbornness towards one another, I think, actually helps quite a bit, because it's like, I don't want to do that, but I know he's going to get the shot that we need, and that's going to make me look cool. So I want to look cool. So I guess we got to go do this, you know? So it's been interesting. On the other side, if my racing career finally, you know, if I finally get found out to be a fraud, which is any day now, I can at least set up lighting and production stuff, just enough that I'm dangerous, as Sean puts it. So I can probably just get a job doing, like, you know, key light guy on, like, commercials.
Well, and I bet you'd never expect to have learned a skill like that when starting up a podcast with a few friends.
No, absolutely not. And like Sean mentioned it perfectly. We're both competitive. Obviously, that's the nature of my real career.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say smart enough because that's really an oxymoron, but I'm smart enough to know that road racing is hard as hell to get opportunity in. I currently have a great opportunity with a major manufacturer. That can end tomorrow, especially in today's times.
Sure.
But I am the only driver in the IMSA paddock, period, that has a podcast, a TV show, a championship under his belt, a factory involvement, and a partner that can really showcase that and utilize that. And so I understand that I am valuable to a brand or to a partner or a sponsor because of all these extracurricular activities we have. So if I have to do a 30-day road trip across the country for 14,000 miles, but then I have that bargaining chip when we sit down to talk about contracts for the next year, I know that's well worth it in a world that's very small and getting smaller and harder to find opportunity. So for me, it's absolutely vital that we put out the best, coolest stuff possible because I know how many fans come to see us at racetracks now because of the podcast and the TV show, and I know how many people don't come to see others based on the interactions I've had. And it's empowering. It makes you want to do a better job and try to, be a good ambassador to the sport. So that's part of it for me. And through our partnership with Continental, we've been able to take Sean from doing multiple jobs for multiple teams, and now he's 100% Dinner with Racers. And my biggest thing about Sean is he's the smartest, most creative person I've ever met, and he's never really gotten the credit or given the opportunity to do exactly what he wants. And right now we have amazing partners that literally say, here's sponsorship, don't embarrass us, see you in the fall. And to me, I think that's a huge win for Sean.
Well, that's
that part.
Sorry, go on, Sean. My apologies, go on.
Oh no, I'll be very quick, but that part is huge to me, and it's I've shed a lot of. We still do some corporate work outside of racing, but I've been able to shed most of my motorsport clients in order to just focus on this. And Ryan will back me up when I say we are not getting rich, but I don't know that I'll ever have another opportunity to, within the confines of our budget at least, be able to have not complete, but a lot of creative freedom to just kind of make whatever we want to make. And you never know if you get an opportunity like that again. And so that's one of the reasons why every episode we've really tried to focus on making every episode kind of unique in its own thing, because if we were doing this for a major, there are a lot of networks that probably wouldn't allow us to have this kind of freedom. But between Continental's backing and the platform with Amazon Prime, we're pretty much allowed to do anything we want as long as it doesn't embarrass Continental. And so I don't know that we'll ever get another opportunity like this again. So that is probably one of the most supreme things I'm thankful for with this deal.
I can imagine. It was Continental was one of the first things I wrote down on my sheet of paper. It's obviously they've been in since the very beginning. I mean, tell the listeners about how you initially struck that deal with Continental Tire and how it's evolved. And more so, the bit that always fascinates me is because there's many podcasts that have sponsors, and they're not always relevant to the podcast, but obviously Continental Tire fits perfectly with the type of podcast that you have. What is it specifically then that they're looking for out of that partnership?
So when we first started kicking this idea around, they were the main sponsor for what is now called the Michelin Pilot Challenge. But basically, it's like the tier down from the WeatherTech series and IMSA.
Yeah.
And it's where a lot of drivers end up or are because there's just so few opportunities in the WeatherTech series for the year. And the budgets are through the roof, whereas what was called the Continental Tire Series is a little bit more affordable, and it's a little bit, it's just more of a realistic thing for a gentleman writing a check. So it just always seems like there's more opportunity there.
Yeah.
So I've been racing in that series since like 2003, and if I finished my career in that series, I'd be stoked because it's awesome racing. And Continental came in. They were the first sponsor that series had since I started it in 2002. I think they came in around 2009 or 10, and they would literally send their people to the drivers' meetings, and they'd be like, hey guys, if you need a set of street tires, let us know for your cars. Hey, if the mechanics need street tires, we'll get them some tires. And I was like, wow, these guys actually care about us. That's cool. And then they did a deal where if you said Continental Tire in a nice way on TV, they'd send you a prepaid gift card. So you're telling me you're a sponsor already of the series, and you're going to pay me to say good things about you? So you can imagine every chance I got on TV, I was like, hey, Continental's awesome.
Was that where the catchphrase began of literally saying the company name but in a high-pitched voice?
Well, honestly, that came up just randomly in the first season. But
how dare you? No, that was months of planning.
Sorry.
Months of planning. We went through focus groups. We went through a committee. We had several different things up on a whiteboard as we were looking at it. I was like, which one should we circle? It wasn't just something you just came up with in 10 seconds inside of a car.
Right. The chicken sandwich thing was the exact same process.
Yeah.
So what I recognized pretty quickly was that Continental was serious about this, because they would send their director of marketing, this guy named Travis Rothler, to our drivers' meetings. And I was like, wow, I don't know any of the people that were part of the previous sponsors of this series. And this guy's here all the time. And they'd come and talk. And at that point, I recognized that NASCAR drivers were using Twitter like crazy. So I started using Twitter like crazy. And I would tag Continental in everything I would post because they were the series sponsor.
Yep.
And so we met a woman named Sherry Herman, who worked at Continental at the time. And Sean was getting to know her as well because he was doing media for several race teams. So they were always in, the same media centers and events and things like that. And so they came to me before DWR existed, and they said, hey, you're doing a great job with this Continental tagging. You're the only driver utilizing our branding. Would you like to go to SEMA, the automotive trade show? It's the biggest one in the world. And just like do social media for us and show everybody what you see. And I'd never been to SEMA. I was like, hell yeah, I'll go to Vegas for free. You're gonna pay me to go? Even better. Like I couldn't believe it. And so that built a relationship. They also sponsored this thing called the Hot Rod Power Tour, which is like a 5-day road trip across the country with all these old hot rods. I had no idea what it was. And they said, wow, hey, we loved having you go to SEMA. Would you go do this as well? And just, it's your, don't embarrass us. You're in charge of social media for us. Show us what you find. And I was like, okay. And so that kind of built the relationship. So with Sean being close with Sherry Herman and working with her on a regular basis, and us having this relationship that was already building on Continental side, when we went to them, they literally were like, yeah, no problem. And it was like, oh, okay. And the final reason this works, and I'm not blowing smoke, the final reason this works is that our fans are diehard supportive and immediately started buying the Continental tires when they saw what the show was.
Yeah.
And when they started buying the tires, immediately people at Continental are like, well, that worked. For the amount of money they gave us versus the return on investment, they were like, oh, we got to keep doing this. And so really it lives and dies because the fans were over the top supportive. And I tell people all the time that we might not have the biggest fan base, but we absolutely have some of the most supportive fans of any form of racing on the planet because they go above and beyond for us.
Well, I'll give you a good example of why you're absolutely right there. I was at Silverstone last autumn for the WAC race, and I was in the queue for pizza, and I saw this lady who had a Dinner with Racers t-shirt on, and I was like, so I went up to her. I said, yeah, no, you're gonna laugh who it is. And I said, oh, it was, yes, exactly. Yeah, it was Vicky. So I said,
amazing.
I said, oh, you listen to Dinner with Racers? She goes, yeah, I know the guys that do it. I was like, no way. I was like, you got to tell them that they've got a fan in Scotland. And we kept in touch. And she said, oh, and I told her what I was trying to do. I said, I'm trying to get into commentary, and that's why I do my own podcast and stuff. And she goes, right, I'll follow you on Twitter and blah, blah. And then we stayed in touch, and she played a big part in me going and coming out to the Rolex 24 this year. And I was due to come to Sebring as well, but Vicky's a big part of that. But that all came down to a Dinner with Racers t-shirt.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember when Vicky went over there. Yeah, she was tweeting us saying like, "Hey, look, people recognize you over here," and that's been really, really neat. And Sean and I both like the phrase, "You can get a million fans, but you have to get them one at a time." And if you can do something for a fan, like a Vicky Miller, for example, where they care enough to go buy your t-shirt for your podcast, not for the race car or for the the event, but the t-shirt for our podcast. And you see that at racetracks. We went to Indianapolis for the Grand Prix race 2 years ago. Sorry, for the IndyCar Grand Prix race.
Yeah.
And there are people all around us with our stuff on. They didn't recognize us, and we were like, "This is crazy," and that just blows our mind.
That is incredible.
Well, the other thing I'm hearing, it sounds like Peter, we've made your career.
You have. You have.
Just remember that. As you continue to grow in your career, just remember it was 100% because of us.
Well, you joke about that, but actually, from IMSA is a series which I've just in the last few years have just got more and more excited about. And you know, a lot of that's come down to, you know, listening to what you guys do. And I, you know, I've interviewed. I mean, at the Rolex 24, I got to interview Wayne, Ricky, and Jordan Taylor all together, which was that was surreal, to be honest. And they were so fun. And then I interviewed Katherine as well, and Ryan DL, and I was due to come to Sebring, but of course that got cancelled. But yeah, no, it's I would give you that one. Where should we go next? Okay, where was the best and worst food? Or I should ask you, Sean, where was the best and worst chicken sandwich?
Ooh, gosh. This is a question I should be prepared for because of course this is a very expected question. I'll say this. I've had many great chicken sandwiches, but I'm still looking for the best one in the future.
Oh my god!
Oh. Boom! PR in it.
You should be in politics, Sean.
I don't know where the worst would be in terms of just chicken sandwich or overall food. Because see, what's funny is the food starts to blend together in terms of what's good and what's bad.
Mm-hmm.
You remember weird stories about the service itself.
Okay.
So like, you know, I won't tell that story of that one restaurant that got our name wrong because that's been said before.
Yeah.
But like, do you remember the waitress in Colorado, Ryan?
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah,
and this isn't. Yeah, the Cole Pern episode when we were in Colorado. Like, this isn't a story about the food, but like, you just remember these weird things that stand out. Like we had it's part of our routine for the podcast. When we start setting it up, you know, a lot of times, you know, we'll talk to a manager or an owner or something like that a day or two before, but you know, the message isn't always clearly communicated, and it's a little bit confusing if you're the waiter to know what exactly is going on with these two idiots setting up headphones and stuff.
Yeah.
So we give them the whole 2-minute spiel of just like, hey, it's just a normal dinner, just treat us like anybody else. It's just ignore all this. You can interrupt us and all the other stuff. And so this waitress in Colorado could not have been friendlier, just a normal, you know, woman doing her job.
Yep.
And then something midway through changed, and I don't think it was related to us, where she hated us. Like, she came in and just like threw the plates at us and wouldn't make eye contact, and was just like, "Here's your check." And I was like, "What did we do?"
I'm convinced she got like dumped like midway through the meal.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Like her boyfriend or girlfriend texted her and was like, "Yeah, I'm out." You know, because she just devolved.
Yeah,
it started out like, "Oh, this is neat," and then at the end of it, like you said, it's just like, "Are you done yet?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, could not have been more excited to have us leave. It was the weirdest experience we ever had.
That's bizarre.
And there was zero interaction with her to think that we even pissed her off.
Right. Yeah. Sean, what was the name of the kid from Brian Till's restaurant?
Oh, I keep wanting to say it was Hemingway, but it was something like that.
Yeah, it was
oh God, I'll have to think of it. Yeah, we had a one of our things when we give the kind of spiel is to remind the waiter that, like, it can be intimidating when you see like a recording box and headsets and all that. Like, if you're a waiter, you don't know if you're supposed to interrupt or can you, and it's actually become a problem because what happens is then people don't serve us. So we'll go 45 minutes or an hour with a guest, and like no one will come and take our orders and whatnot, and you can sense, you know, a lot of times these guests come in hungry, and now it's been an hour, and you're like, well, between ordering and getting the food, it's going to be another 30 minutes.
Right.
So at a certain point, you're just like, where is the waiter? We really, really need to start getting service in here. So we always give them the spiel ahead of time. Hey, you know, it's don't worry about interrupting. You're not going to get us upset. It's not live. You're not going to ruin anything by interrupting and asking for food or, you know, refills and all that kind of stuff. So there was this young kid when we did the Brian Till interview in Ohio who we give him the same spiel, and he took it the other way.
Yeah.
Which was, this was his moment.
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
And, like, he started interrupting and giving us, like, his stand-up routine and monologues, and it was like, yeah, we got it, man. All right, thank you. I mean, oh, God, but his name was so perfect.
Yeah, it, like,
the act we were getting.
Right.
God, and now I can't think of what it was. It was, like, if it was, like, 1912,
Barnaby
would fit in with the rest of the country, but it didn't. Yeah, it was what was it? Now I can't think of what it was.
Yeah.
It'll come to me after the fact,
Right.
and I'll have to email you.
Yeah. So, worst food for me, Sean. Do you remember when I got food poisoning at the Canoe House?
I do remember the Canoe House in Pasadena,
Yeah.
California.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one that's like right next to your house, so we see it
Yeah.
all the time when we're out there filming, and I always like
Yep.
frame.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't remember what I had, but we were interviewing Eric Valdez, who does some racing. He's also an actor and a super nice kid. And Sean and I are always linked up during the episode, so we can kind of like queue up like, hey, I've got a thing about what he's saying. Let me go next or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't stop the conversation. Like, hey, hold on, And
Yeah.
I just messaged him like, dude, something's wrong. Like something's wrong. And he's like, okay. And the second half of that episode, I'm literally trying not to throw up on the table or like
Oh,
fall over
no.
on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Well, and what was funny about that was you'd clammed up for the 10 minutes prior to that text, and that was out of character. Like normally, we try and have a somewhat balance in the way we talk.
Mm-hmm.
But because Eric is an actor first, beyond being a driver, we started talking a lot of Hollywood stuff. So I was noticing that Ryan was checked out, but I thought it was maybe because Eric and I were talking about like the LA production scene.
Mm-hmm.
But little did I know it was because Ryan was just trying not to throw up over Eric and his fiance.
Oh
yeah.
dear.
Good times.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how?
Yeah. What do you think?
Go on.
What do you think the best food we ever had, Sean? What do you think the best food we ever had was?
Well, Ryan, to rehash a joke I just made, I've had many great chicken sandwiches, but I'm still looking for my best in the future.
Right, but like, what do you think is the place that stands out? Like, wow, it's Doug Bowles at Indy.
Doug Bowles at Indy. Right.
Yeah, remember that? Remember Doug Bowles at Indy? Yeah.
So Doug Bowles at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I remember the night before. So Doug called us. We had just finished up another interview, and Doug called us to get a sense of what we were doing for the next day because we were heading over to where he was at Indy. And I'll never forget his first question was, "How big is your crew?" And I was like, "There's no crew. It's just Ryan and I with some headsets and some computers. It's really not a big thing." He's like, "Okay, I'm just trying to work it out with catering." And I was like, "Whoa." We don't need catering. Like, we're fine just picking food up. I mean, we don't, like, Doug, don't trouble yourself. This isn't that big of a deal. And Ryan, I'll let you describe what happened when we arrived.
Yeah, we pull up, and it's literally the pavilion, the world famous pavilion inside the racetrack. It's in the base, like bottom level, ground level, which has garage doors to it because they use it for like everything during the month of May. They have all sorts of big corporate events, and like they have cars in there, but it's literally the yard of bricks is like 5 feet from where we ate dinner.
Wow.
And on top of that, there was like 5 tables, like a buffet set up, and it was like one of everything. There was like a seafood option, a chicken option, steak option, salad, appetizers, cookies. We still have these. They had little milk bottles, like traditional old milk bottles, like they give the drivers, but they were like, like shot, like maybe a little bigger than a shot glass. And we both were like, do we get to keep these? And Doug's like, yeah, take everything. Like, take whatever you want. And it was like, he pulled out all the stops for our dumb podcast, and we ate on the yard of bricks, maybe 20 yards from the checkered, start finish line. And it was like a spread for 20 people. And it was like, this is not like, this doesn't happen to anybody, let alone us. This is amazing. And then to Doug's credit and character, because he's like the coolest guy ever, there were people that were working there, like serving us and like, cleaning things up and all that. And he's like, hey guys, take whatever you want home, and then I'm going to let them all have whatever. And we're like, yeah. So we talked.
Now that's a gentleman.
Stuff. But he let like all the people that were working that night, because they don't do night dinners at the Speedway. I mean, obviously this is like a specific thing for us. And he's like, yeah, guys, take that to go, and like you guys. And so like we're boxing up food with like the guy that made it, and it was super cool. And it turned out the chef there was a fan of our show, which is like, oh, so he came out and met us, and it was just like that. That will never not stand out to me as one of the coolest things we've ever got to do.
Was that one of those ones where you get in the car and you just start? Sorry, Sean, go on.
Oh, sorry. Just real quick, Paul Kelly, who does a lot of PR with Doug Bowles. We have to give some credit to him because he really sold us up to Doug.
Yeah.
And without Paul, I don't know that any of this would have happened, but it went a long way.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And is that one of those interviews where you both get in the car and look at each other and just sort of giggle slightly, going, "How did that happen?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then we have a tradition. Are we gonna tell a tradition?
Go on.
Oh yeah, we can. But that's like 2/3 of our interviews, by the way.
yeah, literally. Anytime we have a good interview, or let's face it, a bad interview, we get ice cream afterwards. So
I like that.
So immediately you're like, all right, find a drive-through with ice cream because that was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go for that.
Yeah, that actually that woke us up to a phenomenon in the United States. I don't know that it's carried over to the UK, but it's probably not worth getting into here. But we've become very aware of a conspiracy that's plaguing the United States, or at least was.
Yeah.
Oh, do tell.
Are you familiar with the soft serve problem at McDonald's?
The soft serve problem.
The late night soft serve. Is it soft serve? What do they call it?
Well, we it's called McFlurry here.
McFlurry, yeah.
Yeah.
That is correct. It's not just McFlurry because you're in Scotland, all right?
Yeah. Right. We had it too.
Yeah.
McDonald's is Scottish, right?
My goodness.
I'm from Scotland. I know what McDonald's is. We get it.
It just sounds better when it rolls off the Scottish tongue. But, so I would honestly say it's like 75% of the time when you arrive at a McDonald's after 10 o'clock, for some reason the McFlurry machine is, quote, not working.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Which is code. Oh, so that's a thing in Scotland?
Yeah, it is. And
so we've done some digging, and we think it's because they start cleaning it early because they don't want to wait till the last minute.
Sure.
So they get out of there early. And so they just lie to you and tell you that it's broken. And so we got to the point where we were filming because we get done with dinner, it's late, then we go like, we've got to get ice cream because clearly that went great.
Yep.
And then we get there and they're like, oh yeah, sorry, machine's broken. To the point where we were filming the interactions because we were going to do like a video of it because there's so many of them.
Yeah,
we have a lot of bits.
Funny enough, whenever I go to Holland and I go on similar kind of thing, go on a tour with our agent over there and do whiskey tastings and stuff, and of course you're talking for like 2.5 hours, and you're and it's a long drive back to the hotel, and we have a tradition where we have a Magnum ice cream from the gas station on the way home. It's absolute win, draw or lose, you have an ice cream, and that's when I can order certain things in Dutch, but that's when it falls apart. I just sort of have to point at it and and I feel quite embarrassed. Now, talking of good interviews, one of my absolute favourites was Randy Lanier. And for our listeners who don't know who Randy Lanier is, Randy is probably one of the most, well, how would you say, probably one of the most successful, while he was at it, one of the most successful drug smugglers in history, and a pretty handy race car driver, and spent a long time in jail. But he was just amazing on that interview. What was it like for you guys to sit down and chat with him, and was it a surprise how open he was about his experiences?
Are we allowed to cuss on this?
Go on, yeah, go for it.
Okay, because there's a backstory for our next guest that we had after that, which we'll get to in a second. But
okay,
I grew up in sports car racing. My dad worked with John Paul Jr. and Sr., which they also had a drug operation.
Sure.
As he did back then. And so the Laniers, the Whittingtons, all these stories from my childhood are like still important to me and a big deal. And so when we got Randy Lanier, we were like, oh my God, this is going to be awesome. And then on the same day, coincidentally, not at all planned, we also had lunch with Don Whittington, who was also extremely hard to get sorted out. And the big thing is that Randy Lanier could be amazing. He might not be. We don't know yet. We haven't had any real interaction with him. But also, we have to drive to Texas that night into the next morning, because the next afternoon we had Eddie Gossage, who is the Texas Motor Speedway president and also a total character. So we know he's going to be good. And so Sean and I were like, okay, we got to get Randy for obvious reasons. But if we don't get him, we have to. What did we say? 9:30 was the hard out, Sean?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it was like 9:30 is the hard out, because we have to drive from South Florida, like Fort Lauderdale, all the way to Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, which is like an 18-hour drive or something ridiculous.
Exactly. And to interrupt real quick, 9:30 was the calculated time to drive straight there with no breaks.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that was like the absolute latest we can leave is 9:30.
Yeah. And so Randy had just gotten out of, like, was it 28 years of prison? or something. And
yeah,
so,
there's a lot.
And so he, when you get out of prison after that kind of time and for that level of crimes and stuff, I guess you get put into like probation and you get a halfway house that you have to live in for a while, and you have to have a job and you have to have proof that you were there. And part of that is you have chores. And so he's texting us, not very often either, kind of like, oh, yeah, hey, I'm coming. I got to do this. He calls us, hey, I got to get groceries for the house first as part of my parole and all this. And we're like, all right, like, how long are we going to wait? And it's getting up there. It's getting later and later. And we're sitting at a restaurant in Delray Beach, which is a very expensive place to be. And we're sitting at a sidewalk cafe, and you can tell they are not happy that we're taking up this table. So we're ordering just like random stuff so they don't get mad and kick us out.
Yep.
So we're having like, we'll have more mushroom caps, I guess. You know, just like whatever. And so he sits down. I think he got there at like 9-ish. And as you've heard, he just opens up and tells us everything. And as he put it, I did, 30 years in prison. I can say whatever I want, And so he gave us one of the greatest, what I refer to on a regular basis as the greatest meal I'll ever have in my life, because he was so kind. His look on his face, he was just like happy that it's one thing to go and interview somebody, but he knew that we knew who he was. Yeah. And he just appreciated that we knew his story so much that he was like, oh, you guys are awesome. And to this day, if we call him for stuff, he's like, hey guys, like, he's like our friend.
Wow.
And just the look on his face when he was telling us all these things, it was like there's pain because he spent so much time in prison and missed a lot of things with his family. Mm-hmm. There's obviously just being in prison would be horrible for that long. But also, like, he lived a life that nobody else, for the most part, ever will. And he could be happy to be there with us. And so Sean and I are always linked up. And I typed out onto my phone. I went to send him a message, and I couldn't see that he had already sent me one. But I typed out the words, and I quote, "Fuck Gossage." Because the stories were so amazing. It was like, I don't care if we go to Texas, we have to keep going. He's amazing. He's telling us all these amazing things. And as soon as I hit send, Sean had already sent me the exact same quote, "Fuck Gossage." And it was like, like, look at that. And that's nothing to do with Eddie. But it was just like,
just to be clear, that has nothing to do with the dislike of Eddie.
Yes.
It's really that we didn't, if we had to sacrifice the Eddie Gossage interview to get a great Randy Lanier one, we were willing to.
Yeah, and knowing Eddie Gossage now, he would have been like, yeah, don't come, get that interview. And so I think that's one of the funniest things that we both texted the exact same thing without even thinking about it to each other, because it's like, this is unbelievable. And probably, like I said, even if the audio there was some sort of weird interference, so the audio is a little off on that one. But I don't care, because for the rest of my life, I will always think that was probably the greatest meal I'll ever have with someone.
I think it was just it was like something out of I'm sure many books and movies might be made about it in time. But I remember driving along in the car listening to it, and when he started to talk about when he was in the very last bit, when he was on the run and they virtually surrounded him on his boat with about 20 ships, and I thought, this is like something out of a Hollywood movie, but it was absolutely true, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And that was the stuff that we couldn't get enough of, was just the guy told it exactly as it was, and I think Ryan and I will both say the same thing generally about our guests, is our favorite episodes are the ones that we don't expect.
Yes.
Because you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. And our communication with Randy up until that episode was pretty sparse, between where he was living and whatnot. Like, you couldn't get him on the phone. He didn't necessarily respond to emails, and it was largely because of his living situation and whatnot. So we would get just, the occasional sentence coming back from him a few days later, like, okay, sounds good. And so we really didn't know, was this guy willing to talk? Was he going to tell a story? Is he even going to show up? I mean, literally until we saw him walk across the street, we weren't sure that he was going to arrive, because we'd had such sparse communication. So the fact that he then sits down and gives us, one of our best interviews we've ever had, will always go down to me as one of my favorite parts about that. I
can imagine. I mean, have there been any near misses? Have there been any interviews that have fallen through at the last minute that have kind of fallen by the wayside?
Yes, but not because of the guest.
Sure. Okay.
But
Gossage.
The funny thing about Gossage was it happened. We left literally 2 hours later. Yeah, we'd calculated the time that if we left at 9:30, we'd be able to get. I think let's just say the meeting time was supposed to be 4 o'clock Central.
Yeah.
And so we always like to get there an hour early. So we'd been scheduled, and Eddie had a hard out. He had to be out by 5:15 or something.
Oh God.
Okay. So we'd had it scheduled, or so we realized that if 9:30 came, we had to go. That was how we were going to make sure we got there by 3. And we left at 11:30, and we got there at 4. So we actually didn't miss any recording time. We had to set up a little bit quicker, and it was definitely because we're responsible drivers, Ryan. I don't know how we shaved so much time, but we were just lucky with traffic.
That was one of the. Yeah, I'm not going to say another word. It was scary. I'm
going to say that an Acura MDX is a very good long-distance traveling vehicle.
Great fuel mileage. We made the time by barely having to stop.
You spent the least amount of time in the pits.
And traffic.
Well, a great tire with low rolling resistance can do that for you. And that's why I choose Continental Tire.
But we did actually miss some interviews because our car was broken into and all of our gear was stolen.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So we actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, but I don't think we've ever had a same day or day before flake in 130 episodes. I mean, we've had people weeks out decide they had to bail for whatever reason, but no one a day before has ever said, like, I can't, or something come up or something.
Wow.
I mean, there's even been the exact opposite. Like Tommy Kendall is a perfect example, who was on the other side of the country the day before he was supposed to meet with us, and literally bought himself a ticket to meet with us because he said he would, which is a story we can never tell enough because Tommy Kendall is such an amazing person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, we had 3 interviews all set on one weekend in Southern California a couple of years ago, and Friday afternoon we stopped to grab lunch in Santa Monica, California, which is sort of a beachside city in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And we came back from lunch with the window shattered and suitcases and Pelican cases taken.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was painful. And the joke I like to make is, of course, they broke in after Amazon Prime cutoff. So, like, it was Friday at 4:30 or 5. Like, we couldn't get any gear in time for the weekend. There were like the specifics that we needed weren't in any retail stores. So I think Townsend Bell we had to cancel on because he was literally an hour later. And to this day we still haven't done Townsend as a result. But the interview that we were really looking forward to that weekend that we had to bail on was Craig Breedlove, who's a land speed record holder, and he's been in the kind of automotive scene for 50 years. There's a Beach Boys song named after him, and he's just sort of somebody that Ryan and I both really, really looked up to, and nailing him down to the date that we did had been a process. We had like 6 cancellations and back and forth because Craig lives in different places. Our traveling schedule means that we're always in Southern California for very limited amounts of time, and so getting the stars to align was difficult. So when we finally did and then had to bail because of a theft, it was really painful, but it worked out. We got him last year.
I must say, you always do in each episode. You always do a pass along question. So the current guest asks a question to the next one. Has there been a particular pass along question where you've gone, oh God, I really don't want to ask that, but we should for entertainment value?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
That's it.
Go on.
There's been several, but Ryan, would you like to take that?
No, go for it, Sean.
Okay, because I have kind of two answers. There are some of our guests don't necessarily understand the concept.
Okay.
Right? And so I'm not going to name names, but folks who are maybe not necessarily used to what podcasts are or quite understand what it is that we're doing. Occasionally you'll come across somebody who, when you talk about pass-along questions, don't understand the concept and then proceed to not ask a question to the point that Ryan and I have to interpret. Like, they then just go on to tell a story. So, like, we had one guest. We had one guest where we had asked them about our next guest and if they had a pass-along question. And the next guest was somebody who'd been involved in sports car racing. And the guest that we were with proceeded to then not ask a question, but then just tell us how much they enjoy Porsches. But like, it wasn't a question. It wasn't with a question mark at the end. It was like, I really like Porsches and blah, blah, blah. And,
Was that Patrick Long?
Okay, so no, I'm not giving anything more away. But to the point we like had to just interpret that into making our own question and hope that nobody noticed.
Okay.
There's been occasionally, and I will name Terry Labonte's name in this one. There are guests who are just don't care, and I don't say it in a bad way. Like Terry Labonte, who's a huge NASCAR legend. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's won a couple championships. Terry Labonte's the man, and his interview with us was fantastic. But he's at a point in life where if he doesn't feel like doing something, he's just not going to do it. So we're like, hey, do you have a pass-along question? Our next guest, I think our next guest was it Jeff Bodine?
Yeah, I think so.
We're like, Jeff Bodine's our next guest. Do you have a pass-along question? He's like, nah.
okay, thank you for
all right, yeah, and that was that.
Yeah, the one that stands out to me, because when you're asking people a pass-along question, and we put this in the email to them ahead of time, and so some of them are great, and they're like, oh yeah, I thought about this, and I want to know, and they actually look up the guest or whatever, and then sometimes, they forget about it, and that's fine too. And we had Mario Andretti, and the next day was Parker Kligerman, and we're like, okay, Mario, tomorrow's guest is Parker Kligerman, and are you familiar with him? And he was like, yeah, he kind of knew who he was, but he wasn't like giving us a whole lot. So he's like, yeah, ask him if he likes dogs.
Mario Andretti.
Sure, that works. Perfect, Mario Andretti. You say whatever you want. You're a hero. And to this day, when I'm queuing up the pass-along question to a guest, I'll say like, it could be something as elaborate as this, or Mario Andretti asks Parker Kligerman, do you like dogs? It can be as simple as that, So that stands out a lot.
I think you could say if they say no to them not liking dogs, you can be like, oh well, you've got heart of stone, sir.
Yeah, right.
Speaking, go on.
It's also funny.
Nothing would have made.
Good.
I'm sorry. Nothing would have made me happier to see Parker Kligerman get canceled on Twitter over dogs. I have no time for your dog hatred, Parker Kligerman.
Yeah.
So speaking of dogs and movies, have you watched The Art of Racing in the Rain and not cried?
I've only seen like part of it.
How about you, Sean?
I feel like I can't answer this question.
I feel bad saying I've only seen a part of it.
I would be lying if I said I'd seen only a part of it.
I made the mistake of watching it on a plane. In fact, it was on the plane on the way out to the Rolex 24, and yeah, I was gone by the end of it.
Okay. Yeah. No, I saw it, but it's fine.
Whenever we see, like in the trade where I'm from, in the whiskey business, whenever we see like a TV show or a film about it, normally all we do is bitch and criticize about it because you know the backside story. Is that the same with documentaries or whatever about racing for you guys?
Yeah, I'm actually going to throw this at Ryan. So I have a problem when I watch documentaries. I'm too close to anything I see.
Yeah.
And I don't say this to be a dick, but Ryan, how many times have I, before I ever given you an opinion on anything, be like, I'm curious what your opinion is before I give you mine? How many times have I said that?
Yeah, all the time.
All the time. And it's literally because I can't tell anymore what is a real criticism versus well, that's not what I would do kind of attitude. Right. And I'm very cognizant of how much I hate that when people do that to me. So I try not to be that way, but at the same time, it's very hard not to when you know the way you would approach it, or when you see shortcuts taken that may not be obvious to an audience, but you know what the shortcuts are.
Sure. Yeah.
There's a documentary that's been out recently in the motorsport realm that's been very, very popular that I will not give opinions on because I'm just an asshole if I give any criticism, because even if I think it's fair, I just become the internet if I'm just like, it really wasn't that good. You know what I mean? So I just don't want to be that guy.
Are we talking about Drive to Survive here?
No, actually, I love Drive to Survive. I'm dead serious about that. I think it's exceptionally well done.
Yeah, I like that too. Except for one thing.
Go ahead.
The voice guy. The fake voiceover guy so they can narrate the story. Kills me. It's like, they're like, oh no, it's so-and-so and so-and-so. You're like, that. No one ever mentioned the guy that finished 7th and 12th in the same sentence for no reason.
Yeah. the fake commentary is always exceptional. It's like, oh, Grosjean is now up to 7th, and that's going to be critical in his points if he's going to try and keep his job over Magnussen. You just don't know how these things are going to unfold. What's Gunther Steiner going to think?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't on Sky when they did that.
Right.
No.
So
that's I love that show otherwise.
And not to commandeer the interview, Peter, but Ryan, you and I really haven't talked about this too much. With I don't know what you would pick up on before and after having been involved on the production side the way you have in the last year. When you see something like Drive to Survive or some of the documentaries out there, are you looking at these things differently now?
Oh, I thought we talked about this, but it's making our show has kind of ruined it for me. Like I was watching. I don't want to say the show because I don't want to take the criticism the wrong way. But I was watching a show recently, like a new motorsports documentary, and it was good and I enjoyed it. But I noticed they kept using like the same exact clip a few different times, and I'm like, well, no, you should have used some other B-roll. You know, like don't use the same clip twice. Find something else instead. And now I'm like, God, I would have never picked up on that like a year ago.
Yeah.
You know, or not even a motorsports related thing, but I watched this like highly controversial video about the pandemic that was out a couple weeks ago, and right off the bat, I'm like, why is the guy hosting it in the show? Like, it's an interview about a person. The guy doesn't need to be on it at all.
Yeah.
But then he can't make it about him.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, ugh. And so things like that have just kind of changed it for me. And like one of the things, like we talked about this before, Sean, but like when we watched Drive to Survive, I think the first season, Ricardo is like all over it, and at the time he's teammates with Verstappen, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And they never really showed Verstappen. And Sean kind of made a good point. He's like, you know, this might not be right, but generally when you're cool with the producers, they put you in a lot more. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. Like, I wouldn't be like, hey, this guy was a dick. Let's keep showing him in our episode.
Yeah.
And you notice Ricciardo is like the star, and Verstappen's barely mentioned. It's like, I wonder if he didn't have time for this, you know?
There's an expression I love called you want your editor to love you. And so when you watch Drive to Survive, it's something I think about a lot, because there are certain people they put in exceptionally good lights and some people they don't. And you're like, that, I don't know if that's true, but that may have more to do with how much time and willingness this person put in front of that production team to make themselves look good.
Right.
Well, interesting you say that, because I have a very different view of Christian Horner than I did before watching that. My opinion of him degenerated very quickly by the episode in that second series.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, because before I thought, you know, right? I mean, the way that this, I don't know. Sometimes you never know if it's put on or not, and sometimes in Formula One I can be a bit cynical. But it was like Red Bull are meant to be kind of like the fun team, and Christian Horner's like the kind of young team principal who's like, yeah, cool. Yeah. And then he's just absolutely roasting Pierre Gasly in the pit box in front of cameras, and I'm going, this is either not realistic or this guy's just not a nice person overall.
It's funny you mentioned Gasly, because watching the final thing, I think Pierre Gasly didn't get enough time, and I actually really like the guy, only from racing. Like, I don't know anything about him personally, but I cheer for him actively, and I thought the way they handled that situation was so like, and yeah, I agree with you, because I like Christian Horner. I like the fact that he was a driver, realized the writing was on the wall for him, switched gears, and now he's like this, like you said, younger guy that's super successful, and he's going to be around as long as he wants to be, and I think that's super cool. But yeah, the Gasly thing, I was like, guys, like, I don't think it was a fair shake. But yeah, that's interesting that you went the complete opposite direction on your impersonation of him, because I chalked it up to like, well, I don't agree with that situation, but
Yeah, and it's funny because I never looked at it in either of those directions. I looked at it as a necessary story point to tell the story of what actually happens. And what I mean by that is whether Christian Horner is a good guy or a dick.
Right.
You know, they change drivers. That's nothing they can edit around.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So they have to, from a story standpoint, they have to create a storyline that you can see it coming. Because if it was just like, oh, we love Gasly, and he's fired. Like, you can't do that. That's terrible storytelling. So you have to dig for those clips where they berating him, where they show him make flaws, because otherwise, why would they have dropped him? you're sort of compelled to do that from a story standpoint. So It's funny because I never walked away with any different opinion, to be honest, of Christian Horner. Maybe it's because I've always had a high one of him anyway, but I thought he looked fine. What's funny is, of all the things in the Red Bull storyline on Drive to Survive, there was one moment that stuck out to me, and maybe it's because of the PR side of my career. But when Albon makes the move up to Red Bull, they have and this is clearly not staged, they have a reporter immediately get into questioning about Albon's family history and problems that his mom had, and the PR guy with Albon shut it down quick and was a dick about it, and I was so happy to see that, because I was like, that's what an actual PR person does, and I was like, that's actually his job, because I can sometimes be a little bit critical of how PR people on our side of the country are with things. And in this case, this was a guy taking the action, saying, no, we're not going to do this. But it was perfect from a storytelling standpoint to then set up the story of what actually happened with Albon's family.
I thought it was very good. I thought it was kind of very, in a way, it showed the kind of personal side where he's like, no, he's our guy, and if you're going to try and screw me, I'm gonna embarrass you on Netflix, sir.
Global television, exactly.
But he deserved it. He deserved it.
Exactly. And I think Ryan would back me up. There's a lot of PR people on our side of the world who would have not interrupted, let the interview happen, and then played victim afterwards. Like, I don't know how he got away with that. He said he wouldn't do it, and then he did it. Whereas this young guy was like, no, I'm going to sit here in the middle of it, and I'm going to shut it down as soon as it comes up.
Right.
And I just respected the hell out of that process.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I also noticed was that every single crew chief in Formula One has the same BBC accent. So just one crew chief for every car. It's like, good job, mate. Good job, mate. Good job. Good job. Good job. Grosjean is on hard.
Yep. Head down. Keep pushing.
Yeah. That's great job, mate. Great job.
We're gonna steal that. We're stealing that.
Stealing that.
That's
for sure.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Who is now talking of crew chief? Who is the biggest character crew chief in IMSA? Would you say?
Oh, in IMSA. Oof. Crew specific.
Or maybe team owner. Crew chief / team owner.
Well, I'll let Ryan give you his take. I'm going to give you a very non-answer, which isn't being PR.
Again.
It's actually telling the truth. There are. We'll keep it to team owners for a second. Like, it depends on what. A lot of the sports car team owners that we've been around, many of them are compelling in their own way, and it really depends on what you identify with. So, for example, Ryan and I are both big fans of Mike Shank, who runs an NSX team right now in IMSA. And Mike Shank is extremely likable because he's this guy from Ohio that didn't grow up with money and kind of made his own way and made his own, team into what it is today, and it's very, very successful. So he's extremely likable because he's such a down-home guy. He loves his beer as much as anybody. Whereas, obviously, there's a team owner that I worked with closely through the years named John Potter, who I'm still very close personal friends with. And John did not come from modest means. He came up from a very wealthy upbringing. And so he doesn't have necessarily that built to him, but he's also incredibly funny. And he's done a good job over the years of paying everybody on time and staying true to his commitments. So it's hard not to like a guy like that. And he's been so good with fan interaction. So a lot of fans like his story, and I love his story. Then on the complete other side of the spectrum, you've got a guy like Roger Penske, who isn't necessarily the world's biggest boisterous character, but he may know a thing or two about running a successful racing and a successful business, and how could you not respect the hell out of that? So it's like, one of the problems when you work so closely in a sport is you identify with so many characters that you kind of don't root for one anymore as much as you root for a story that you find compelling.
Right.
What about you, Ryan?
I would say crew chief wise, Dan Banks he's a bit of a character, but he also works for one of the biggest organizations in motorsports, so he can't exactly just be like Dan Banks, But if you look at the people he's worked with and the guys that work underneath him, they love him, you know, and you don't love a guy who's hard to work for that's no fun. And one of our favorite things about Dan was that when we interviewed him, because he's the Corvette team manager basically, and he's like he works on the cars, you know what I mean? Like he's a real deal guy. But we interviewed him at his local pub in like Nowhere, Michigan, and when we called ahead, they were like, "Yeah, who's the guest?" And we're like, "Dan Finks," and they're like, "Dan? He works in racing?" And
wow.
Here's a guy who like loves to go out drinking all the time because he's at this bar enough that they all know him, and they had no idea because he doesn't put himself. He's not like there's no ego, there's no attitude. He's just like this happy-go-lucky guy. So I would say like a Dan Finks, because every time I see him, he's always got a smile and he's got so many great stories about blowing up rental cars with like Dorsey Schrader and Tommy Kendall back in the day. And, you know, obviously now it's a little bit more professional in terms of like he can't be dicking off like that like he could in the past.
Yeah.
But I would say Dan Finks probably pops out. He was the first name I thought of.
He's the big character. Can you imagine him coming in, getting home, and he's like, "Oh, where you been? Oh, I just went over to France. What were you doing over there? Oh, you know, just working." It's like, what won a race? No big deal. No big deal.
Yeah, we're pretty sure we ruined, because the dive bar he went to, nobody knew him as anything other than Dan. We're pretty sure we ruined it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Of course.
They're like watching races and stuff to know how his team did.
But that's not the case with Mike Shank, isn't it? You tell us about the copper penny.
Yeah, copper penny, man. People talk to me about this all the time. And I want to point out that we went beer for beer, and I was slurring a lot less than Mike Shank, who's like a professional drinker. And that's just me bragging a little bit. But no, Shank is an absolute – he's what I would call a bro. Like, he's the guy that you see and you're like, as soon as we get done today, let's go get a drink and just, like, you know, bust balls and shoot the shit. And he's good for that. We had him on our 12 Hours Pooper C ring earlier this year, and he was doing shots, you know, on the air. This guy owns an IndyCar team. He's partners with the guy that owns, like, Sirius XM. And he's like, shots with Shank, you know, and he's texting me afterwards about his mutton chops versus my mustache. And I'm like, yeah, this guy's a character. But the copper penny, I remember we got there, Shank shows up on a golf cart. They have a stage. They have, like, a floating barge for, like, bands to play on. And then, like, right across the little waterway, there's, like, someone's house. Like, we're talking 20 feet away. Just the way the property is. There's DP bodywork from the Shank Daytona prototypes on the wall.
Wow. And
half the people there on a random, like, whatever day it was, are wearing Mike Shank Racing t-shirts. So it was eye-opening in the best kind of way. It was like this is exactly what I hoped for Mike Shank.
Yeah, and then for those who don't know him, you know, he's as you say, he's a guy who's not come from money. He's built up a race team, and you know, an extraordinary guy. But what struck me the most about that interview was that he was it Sam Cornish, the IndyCar NASCAR driver? I can't remember. And he'd given him
either now. But.
Yeah, he'd given him a big leg up, and then they'd signed a future earnings deal, and then he got a big Penske deal, and they just you know, flaked on it, and he did not, you know, he told the story, but he didn't whine about it at all. He just seemed, I would be furious if that had happened to me.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he thought about telling that story before he came, because he mentioned, like, yeah, my wife and I were talking about this, and I think we do want to tell it. And I think the point was, he's like, I want it to be known, but I'm not going to sit here and bellyache about it. And I asked him, like, 6 months ago, we were just talking at one of the races, and a fan came up mid conversation and was like, oh, hey, guys, yeah, I love the episode. And he turned to me and he goes, do you know how many people ask me about that Hornish thing now? He's like, it's crazy. And I was like, well, yeah.
He deserved to have the story told. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's and what is amazing about him is that I can't imagine what it's like to put together like a GT Daytona budget, whatever it is, $3 million, $5 million, or whatever it is, to come up with that money privately. I do not know how you do that. And it comes back to your point you made about Continental earlier on. Do you think that in sports car racing, or in any racing in general, getting sponsorship is difficult? Do you think it's because the money's not there to be spent, or do you think it's because the right value is not given, would you say?
Well, the biggest problem is the viewership isn't strong enough, so the budgets are way out of line compared to how many people watch this.
Sure.
So it's extremely hard. And let me rephrase that. It's pretty much impossible to get a real corporate sponsor unless they actually like the kind of racing, or you can knock the number down so much that it makes sense. So if you look at pretty much the entire GTD field, bar maybe a handful of cars. There's a lot of manufacturer money flowing to keep those programs out there. So then you can go get like a smaller number from, let's say, a gentleman driver or from an actual sponsor, but it's super hard to find those these days. And the reality is like, if you went to, you walk up to Valvoline and you say, hey, Valvoline, we'd like to do $3 million for GTD, and here's our TV numbers. What do you think? They're going to look at that and go, we can give a tenth of this to a YouTube kid, and he's going to see 4 million people look at it, and you're not going to get 4 million people a year.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the big problem there. And I think the reality is that if you broke it down and you looked at sports car racing in the United States, it's not funded by fan base or TV stuff. It's funded by wealthy people keeping it going.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really do the breakdowns on stuff, like, no fans could show up to a sports car race, and it would still happen because the gentleman driver's paying for the Porsche GT3 Cup, the Lambo Cup, the Michelin Pilot Challenge, and WeatherTech. They're keeping it going. So from the series side, they're getting whatever they're getting from the teams, and they're getting whatever they're getting from TV and all these other things and manufacturers. So they have a good business going, but it's not going to help knock the cost down.
No, you're right.
It becomes a business thing where it's like IMSA, for example, they're probably doing fine when everything's up and running because they have so many support series on a given weekend that all are paying an entry fee and all paying a fee to like add up to it. So they're fine. But it's the guy that's like, well, I can't afford to go to GTD racing. I guess I'll just stop. That it's like, well, yeah, of course. Why would you keep doing this if the juice isn't worth the squeeze?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you need, like you say, you need people like John Potter or Cooper McNeil or somebody like that. It's people of that level of personal wealth, basically.
Yeah, and
you do. I'm sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was saying you need them to feel valued.
Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things that I hear from these guys, because we all run in the same circles, is that you have a guy like a Ben Keating who shows up and he spends a lot of money because he really loves doing this.
Yeah. And
when I hear like a Ben Keating or a John Potter is pissed off because some of the BS that goes on, I'm like, how is this guy not getting treated like a king?
Correct.
He's spending all this money.
Correct.
And that's where I'm like, ugh, if they're going to treat the guy that's paying for it like that, or that guy's got these actual justified issues, that's not a great place to be for someone like me who they can replace whenever they want because I'm just a measly race car driver.
Yeah, I can understand that. I wouldn't agree with the last point, but but you're right. There's you're right though. There's a lot more pro race car drivers than there are amateurs with that level of disposable income. Yeah. I guess.
Yeah,
it's mismatched. Yeah. Okay. Now there's one coming towards the end now. On the Amazon Prime show, my favourite episode was the VIR episode, so Virginia International Raceway. For those who haven't seen that episode, and they should right after this episode, tell us why you chose VIR and what the experience was like telling their story, because it's an exceptional place.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a lot of interesting things with VIR. For me, on a personal level, I made my pro racing debut there back in 2003, and I had my first pro race as a pro finishing driver against top name guys in 2010, and it's been like a second home to me because for a long time the series I raced in didn't go to Road Atlanta, so Virginia being 5-6 hours away was kind of like the closest track, so I kind of considered my home track.
Mm-hmm.
But the big thing about VIR that we really like was that it disappeared for 20-30 years or whatever, and then came back. And almost every racetrack in the world right now, as soon as it goes away, it turns into a mall, a neighborhood, a development of some sort. It doesn't come back ever. And the fact that they were able to take that and bring it back and become a viable business that is growing and one of the drivers' favorite racetracks to go to in North America is a really interesting story. Now, Sean and I are also big nerds about all sorts of things, and it's right in the middle of the South when back in the day with the Civil War taking place, there's a ton of history in that area that we also wanted to showcase. And so I'll let Sean take it from there, but that was there's a lot of these things going on. We want to talk about the town, the racetrack, and then how the hell a racetrack disappeared and came back. Oh, and on top of that, it's owned and ran by a woman. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that basically kind of summarizes it. When we're looking at episodes to do, the thing that we both obsess at, and back to that whole idea that we can do 6 episodes that are entirely unique from each other, is if we're going to do something like a track history episode, I want to make sure that there's a ton of layers to it. So it can't just be about like, here's the history of this track. It was started 30 years ago. End of story. So it has to be about the town that it's in, the community that's built around it, and all the things that come with it. And what was cool to me about VIR, beyond the fact that, like Ryan said, very rarely to never does a racetrack go away and come back, but it's centered in a part of the world that is very much a cross section of small town USA, but with a huge history in the Civil War and the antebellum South and things like that, which, good, bad, or indifferent, is a unique thing that you can address with this particular track. So, when we're looking at ways to tell a story with a lot of fingers to it, VIR just made sense. But we can talk about the Civil War. We can talk about Wendell Scott, who grew up there, who was the first African American stock car driver. There's just so many angles that we could get into, and so we tried to do that. So what's cool about VIR, both in terms of the episode, but in reality also, is that it's a beautiful racetrack, but with a really cool story behind the entire community that surrounds it.
Yeah,
and
go on.
The overall goal for me was, I get to go to a bunch of places that I would have never had a clue were super cool or super interesting, and I always use Long Beach as an example because I got to race there for the first time in 2015. I'd watched the race on TV a million times, but I didn't know much about the event itself, and it blew my mind. It's something like 250,000 people come through there over the course of 3 or 4 days because they don't even care about the race. It's just like it's been there for so long, and it's the thing to go do. And I remember thinking, like, I had no idea this many people come to this event. And so when I think about VIR, I'm like, well, let's say you're a West Coaster and you have one race you can get to on the East Coast this year. You're going to make a vacation out of it. Why would you go to VIR instead of, Road America or Lime Rock? Let's show people. And that's something that I hope we can do again with other places. It's like here's what you need to do and see when you come to this particular place. And that's kind of where it all began.
Well, that leads on nicely. When I noticed that you took took Yoshi, your Honda van to VIR. Which track's next on the list then to give the DWR treatment?
Well, the best part about having Yoshi there, my Honda Acti, was my dad brought it up from Atlanta because people are like, "Did you drive that here?" I'm like, "Look, it's 6 hours on the highway. That poor thing at 60 miles an hour is holding on for dear life." And so I convinced my dad to drive it up in a truck and trailer so we could have it for the weekend. But it's a great discussion piece, and so we just had it there. It's wrapped with Dinner with Racers Marlboro livery on it and everything. But the people at VIR are so cool. They let us on track as soon as the IMSA sessions were done, or before they started. We had full range. We could do anything we wanted.
Wow.
And that's why that episode did so well, because the visuals we got were phenomenal, and they understood the value in like having us go do that stuff. And so we probably did, because I didn't race that weekend, and we probably did more laps, Sean and I, than anybody else that raced at VIR that weekend. And it was great to have Yoshi there. We'll see if we end up doing another track thing in 2020. Obviously, with the current situation with the pandemic, a lot of things are in the air. But if we do something like that, we'll probably bring Yoshi out again.
I think you've got to. When you were out on track with Yoshi, were you pushing on a little bit?
Oh yeah, we did a couple of things because we had Andy Lally driving the MDX around.
Okay.
And Sean would be like riding with us or flying the drone, and it's like, all right, let's kind of see what this thing could do. And I've got it. It's got brand new Continentals. It's got 15-inch wheels, which are pretty big. And it was kind of scary a few times because like it's a toaster oven. Once that thing tips over, it's got our name written all over it. Everyone's going to find out. So we got to make sure we didn't roll it over.
Yeah, I actually had to lecture you a couple times because we had GoPros on the outside of the van, and those GoPros can be, in terms of just, I'm thinking about visuals, so the GoPros are very sensitive to high frequency vibration. Well, Ryan couldn't not take the racing line with his Acti, which would mean taking the curbs, and it was like every other corner, I'm like, off the curbs.
Yeah, but I'm also
he just could not do it.
But also, I'm thinking that any club racer that's ever been to VIR that knows the track is going to be like, man, he didn't even track out all the way. So I'm like thinking about that in my head too, because I don't want some guy that's like really good at VIR to be like, this idiot doesn't know what he's doing. So couple things there, but yeah, fair enough. At least I didn't almost run your leg over.
This dumb TCR champion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lally prides himself on running, on showing just how close he can put a car into any situation, which would include my legs.
Yeah, and I don't think he knows that he almost ran your leg over.
Nope.
He's forgot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now the one almost we're nearly on the final question. Tell us about the Magnus livecast at Daytona that you guys were both involved with, and second part of the question is, can we bring it back?
Oh man, two-tiered question. So I'll give you a rambling answer as I think of it. So it was fun during its time, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
And I like the single greatest. Oh, I shouldn't say the single. There are like 3 or 4 great things about the Magnus webcast. First of all credit to John Potter, and also the crew at Magnus Racing, who literally had to give up some of their pit space to make that thing happen, which is a commodity in a 24-hour race. I mean, that's a space now that they can't stack tires. Crew guys can't sleep. We can't have guests. Like, it's actually a pretty big commitment from a team to allow something like that to happen beyond just John Potter decreeing it. You know, the guys had to be okay with it. And in all of the 10 years or so that I was doing it with the Magnus guys, never was there a complaint, at least in front of my face.
Wow.
So
fair enough.
I'll give credit to every crew guy that's ever been through the Magnus paddock, that they all understood what it was and let it happen. But basically, for those who don't know, Magnus Racing, which is still a team in IMSA today, I'm not involved with them anymore, but still root them on. They're now teamed with Grasser Racing in the IMSA series, but John Potter and the Magnus guys always prided themselves on having fun and doing a lot of fan interactive things. So that would include doing a 24-hour pitchside web stream during the entirety of the Daytona 24. And so we'd have like team radio coming on, and then usually myself and a co-host would be on there for the entirety of the thing. And then we'd bring in cycle guests and whatnot. So honestly, I think in many ways what Dinner with Racers is now, the Magnus webcast definitely helped plant some of that seed. I mean, I certainly wouldn't give the Magnus webcast full credit, but a couple things. I mean, one, I think people then saw the chemistry because Ryan co-hosted for several years when he wasn't driving. So Ryan and I co-hosting really showed the chemistry between the two of us. I think the Magnus web stream showed my ability to produce dumb, fun stuff for no money. But it also just became a thing that I think fans of sports car racing who were into sort of the Magnus Racing goofy style humor really appreciated it from year after year. And so last year, 2019, was the last year of doing it. And it was really because I knew with the Amazon show and how everything kind of layered over itself during the off season, it was getting harder and harder to do every year because of Dinner with Racers. So basically that Magnus webcast from, let's say, November until the 24 is a really tough time of year if you're in the marketing and PR side of sports car racing, because that's when all of your stuff has to happen. You have to get your crew suits all done in time, your new car designs. Magnus Racing, we always put out really cool, fun videos, which would be my entire month of January. And then you'd top it off with this 24-hour web stream that, you know, the web stream itself was fun, still a lot of work, but the prep of it was a ton of work. Not just in terms of like making sure you had segments and whatnot, but even just down to like working with the internet company in Daytona Beach to make sure that they were ready to go with your internet feed, which literally every year was a different process and a huge headache. Getting IMSA approvals, working out with the crew, et cetera, et cetera. So last year was the last year just because as Dinner with Racers continued to get busier, that time that I used to be able to allocate into really setting up for, you know, the coming season with my sports car clients, that time was getting eaten into by Dinner with Racers commitments between edits. And once we knew we had the TV show going in 2019, I knew that there was no way this would be able to continue and be able to do both at the same time. And it was just, if I'm being blunt, it was time for me to stop doing it. So that was that. But Ryan was my co-host for several years. I think 2014 was probably the year that we probably made the biggest name, and that's when it became known as the Ryan Eversley web stream.
Yeah, it was all me. I handled it all, took care of it. Yep.
Anyway, if it comes back in the future, I don't know. We will see. There's a lot of things you have to consider in terms of you know, whether we do something specific to Magnus or something like that in the future. Certainly as time goes on and my memories of it become rosier, I'm sure that the time will come that I'll like to do something of that ilk. I don't know if it'll necessarily be the exact same format, but you never know. I mean, between partners, obviously Daytona Speedway is a big fan of what we do. Yeah, I would never say never, but I don't think it would be coming in the way that people were used to.
Okay, so basically you now know that Twitter's now going to go, because literally tens of people listen to this podcast, so you know that everyone's going to be like, so when's the Dinner with Races live cast coming then, guys?
Yeah. Well, the key thing I would remind you of is this entire thing exists because of Continental Tire.
What? Yeah. Who?
So I'm not sure how well that would work out with IMSA's current commitments, and you can't blame anybody for that.
No, that's true. That is absolutely true. Yeah. Okay. Final question. I asked this to every guest I have, and I suspect that you guys are going to have a much different answer than the others. So I always ask each guest if they could choose one race to compete in any car and any co-driver, who would it be? So to give a bit of context, when I interviewed the Taylors, you can tell they're competitive. Ricky chose Tom Christensen, Wayne chose Alan McNish, and Jordan chose Mario Andretti. And I think it was like Audi Diesel, Ferrari 333, and Porsche 956. So you can tell that even in a complete fantasy world, they're still competitive. Ryan Dale chose Dario. Don't know why he chose Dario, but he chose Dario, Bentley Speedy, and Le Mans. And then Katherine Legge chose. She was sweet. She was like any of my current teammates and an Aussie V8 supercar at Bathurst. But given your guys with Thursday night blunder and stuff, I guess you guys are going to have a more alternative answer.
Ryan.
No, I want to hear what you say. This is interesting.
Oh, okay. Do I want to win or do I want to have fun?
It's entirely up to you. Entirely up to you.
If I can pick anything, I'm going RJ Valentine. in my favorite Gen 1 Daytona prototype, the Picchio. Because here's the thing. Like, if RJ is my teammate and I'm in a Picchio, it ain't my fault. Right?
Okay.
And so I'm just going to have fun at that point and just enjoy it, because if we don't win, I have so many things I can blame.
Absolutely. And which race would you enter it into? Which race would you go for?
Oh, no, that's it. I actually think I'm going Bathurst.
In a Daytona prototype, that'd be cool.
In a Gen 1 Picchio, and the specific reason, it actually has nothing to do with the Picchio, it has everything to do with RJ, because something about RJ in Australia is just something I have to see. I just have to know what that life would be like, because I have a feeling it would be amazing.
What about you, Ryan?
Honestly, this is going to sound lame, but I already got to do the race with the teammates I wanted. In 2004, I built a LMP2 car for James Cook Racing, and we did Petit Le Mans together. And my teammates were Andy Lally and Spencer Rampelli, who were like my big brothers. And on top of that, my dad helped run the program for that weekend. So I had my dad crew chiefing and on the radio, and I had Andy Lally and Spencer Rampelli as my co-drivers, and we finished second in a car that I pretty much built at like 17 or 18 years old. So I kind of I already kind of have that awesome memory that, like, I know that when we're all in our, well, they'll be in their 90s soon, but I know that when we're all older, we'll be sitting around. Lally will be dead. He'll have broken his neck skateboarding or something. But Spencer and I will be talking about Petit Le Mans, in that year that we did that. And I think that's just the coolest thing that I have that memory to look back on. But for argument's sake, I would say I'd love to do the Daytona 24-hour, because my goal, the only other goal I have unchecked in my career is I want to win the 24-hour. I don't care in what class. I want to watch.
Yep.
And I'd say I'd want to do the Acura DPI, because I really do actually want to drive that car at Daytona.
Yep.
And for teammates, I mean, honestly, Lally and Spence again, because they're just like, it's those guys have been so successful there, and they're awesome. And I could give you a list of like 100 people I'd love to have, but like getting to do something we get to do is amazing. Getting to do it with your friends and you're all operating on a level like that, and it's like clicky. It's so cool. So
So your all-star Rolex 24 lineup would be Acura DPI, with Spencer and Andy, for the win.
Yeah.
I don't think that's out of the question. I think we've got to make that happen. I think we somehow.
Yeah, I think that's.
Well, my corporate answer is James Hinchcliffe, Takuma Sato, and I need to be in the third Penske DPI. Now, obviously, Sato's the man, but I don't know that endurance racing is his strong suit. But I don't care. I just want to be on the grid with him, So
he'd be so awesome.
Yeah, if I was corporate Acura, I'd be like, okay, let's take Eversley, Hinch, and Sato. They're all really well liked by their fans. They're all company men. They've been here for a long time, and like 2 of them are pretty fast. Let's go do that at Daytona, and I think that would be a home run. Hinch and I talk about it all the time. He's like, "Why are we not driving one of those things?" I'm like, "You have to make that happen."
That's on you, man.
Yeah, let me know where to sign.
You'd be like, Hinch has his own beer. You could drink his own beer afterwards. You can be like, you got to bring a couple of kegs of your own beer
afterwards. Yeah, I might recommend that you and James are the first 2 stints.
Honestly, I don't care. Just to be able to be entered in a Penske.
Wear the suit. Okay, fair.
That would be very cool. I mean, to be to go with Penske would be pretty cool. And of course, where does the, for those that don't know, the Acura DPI prototype, where the engine has quite surprising beginnings, doesn't it?
Yeah, it actually starts out as it literally is the Acura TLX motor that's in the street car. It's also shared in the Honda Odyssey, and it's also a lot of componentry from it is shared in the Honda boat motors that they sell for power sports boating. However, it developed and was built and used in our TLX GT program that we ran in World Challenge in 15 and 16. So I know that motor like the back of my hand, and I still tell people when they ask about it, I'm like, I remember we were doing fuel mileage testing once, and we were doing pit speed limit testing, and I'm like, well, it's a sprint series. We don't do pit stops, and we don't do fuel mileage. They're like, yeah, don't worry about it. And then they announced the prototype program. I was like, God, that adds up. So yeah, it's a pretty neat thing. If you look up, there's a guy named Bozy Tatarovic on Twitter. He did a complete write-up, I think, for Haggerty about the motor, and he got all this information from HPD, and it literally uses an absorbent amount of street Honda parts from the Honda Odyssey van, the TLX motor for the Honda Acura TLX in the race motor. It's really pretty impressive.
So basically, we're telling Acura that to get the best out of that motor, they've got to have you, Hinchcliffe, and Sato in the car, and me and Sean are going to do a live webcast in the pits.
Absolutely.
Oh, no. I'll do one. Here's the thing. I'll do a live webcast. Can I push for another car if contracts aren't a thing?
Okay.
Sure.
I would push for a 4th DP if contracts change next year. I would then challenge you. I would start my own Penske DPI program. It'll be me and Rene Rast, and I'll also do the web stream because Rene will just drive the whole thing, and I still think we'll beat you.
No, you won't.
It'll be me and Rene Rast, except I won't drive.
Oh, if you're not driving, okay, yeah.
I'm not driving. It's just going to be Rene the whole time. We'll have RJ join as well, but again, it'll just be Rene driving the whole time.
Think how much content we'll have on the webcast.
It'll be an awesome web. There will be results guaranteed. It's the perfect lineup, honestly. Yeah, it's like RJ Valentine, myself, Rene Rast. Rene, I don't know if we'll work with IMSA to see if we can change how driver times work, but basically it'll be Rene the whole time, and then I'll see the
right. And you guys might win, but you personally will lose.
Doesn't matter what I do in life, Ryan. I always lose.
You're going to be so. You're going to be like, they're going to be handing you the Rolex, and you're going to be like, I hate everything right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit.
Rene. Oh, you know what'll happen, and this is way too inside for Ryan and I. But Rene, having driven for 24 hours, will be sitting on the podium about to die. They'll give him his watch, and then his hand's going to be shaking as they give me mine, and he's going to say, "Earn this." There's a lot of layers to that joke. I hope everyone understands it.
I'm sure there's going to be someone out there who's going to understand it. I'm sure.
Okay.
I remember talking to the Rolex watches. I remember the Rolex this year and seeing John Edwards putting his on where they were getting interviewed, and he's getting his, like, he's so excited, he's getting it out the box and stuff, and he puts it on his wrist. And honestly, you could have put 3 of these around his wrist.
Yeah, he's a thin man. But by the way, John Edwards, who we've never done a podcast with, he joined us on our dumb iRacing thing that we do every Thursday, and he's a cool kid. He's got a sense of humor. It's just a lot of times, especially in factory programs, one of the things, as you know, with our show is we try to get the personalities out, because a guy like John Edwards is actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
As is Dane Cameron or Patrick Long, and so we're glad we get to bring some of those fun characters out.
Yeah, no, and you guys have done a great job. And before we finish, I got to say thank you so much for all the work you've done with the program. It's enhanced my knowledge and appreciation of sports car racing and racing in general, and I've discovered a lot of people in racing that I never knew about, and glad I did. So you guys are doing a brilliant job, and keep it up. Is there now before we go, how do people get in touch with you on social media and stuff like that?
Our Twitter is our biggest thing that we use, and that's at DWR Show on Twitter. We're also on Facebook, Dinner with Racers, and we have an Instagram account we haven't done anything with because it's just one more thing.
Yeah.
but yeah, and then my personal account on Instagram is at Eversley, and on Twitter at Ryan Eversley.
My social media probably isn't worth following, but I am on Twitter with spicy hot takes at Sean Heckman. I'm also Sean.Heckman on Instagram, and Sean.Heckman on Instagram is literally just photos of my corgi, who is Welsh, and
oh wow,
and what I'm watching on TV. That's pretty much all my Instagram feed is dog photos and television photos. But if you are in the UK, we of course are on Amazon Prime. So if you go to amazon.co.uk, look up Dinner with Racers, and we have 6 amazing episodes, and hopefully some more coming later this year. And of course, there's dinnerwithracers.com, where you can catch all 130-some podcast episodes with all kinds of people in the US. We would love to get to Europe, by the way, but budget and timing is kind of thing. This was actually a year we were hoping maybe that would be a possibility, but that may have gone away given the current situation.
Well, you got to come and do Scotland, because there's some cool stuff here, and there's some quick drivers who live around here too.
I think we'd both love to do it. I think it's also the worst idea ever, between the beer and the bad food. That's like both of our hot points. So like Ryan and the beer and me and the bad food, it's like there's no way we're getting out of Scotland alive.
It's not a bad place to settle. It's all right.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks so much for coming on the show, and hopefully see you at the racetrack sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Peter. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Can we do a William Wallace outro?
Go for it.
So it's like Ryan and I, we're both about to get our heads chopped off. And then we do the yell. Should we do the yell, Ryan?
Go on.
Yeah, go for it.
You gonna do it with me? No. Ready?
Yeah.
Freedom!
Freedom!